Well, we have Dr. Farkas here, who has absolutely amazing and fascinating professional background in defense and security. She worked as a senior advisor of the Supreme Allied Commander, as well as a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense for the NATO Summit. And I think, Dr. Farkas, you're an exceptional leader who has an experience of working for the think tank as well as for the Congress. Dr. Farkas spent 8 years working as a professional staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, as well as she was a senior fellow of the American Security Project. So welcome again, and thanks for being part of this project and ready to deliver your remarks, which I'm sure will be very interesting to our audience here. U.S. and Georgia enjoy very strong bonds of friendship, and our cooperation is based on the same values and principles our nation embrace and promote. Over the years, we've been cooperating on a number of issues, starting from education, democracy, rule of law, but no offense to any areas of cooperation. It would be very fair to say that U.S. Georgia Defense Cooperation, military cooperation, is the backbone of our strategic partnership.
Yes, absolutely.
And we've started the accelerated phase of our cooperation in 2001 with the Train and Equip program, followed by a number of key programs and initiatives, and currently we're dealing and working under the enhanced defense cooperation, and many things has been achieved. Currently, more than 12,000 Georgian troops were trained under the United States Marine standards by the United States Marines, and it of course affects the chemistry between our soldiers, men and women in uniform, and the interoperability level of our troops. So I'd like to use this opportunity and thank you for U.S. continued support to Georgia, to our defense transformation efforts, and to our military. You're here on a very important time, especially considering the challenges we face, security challenges in the region caused by Russia's military aggression over Ukraine or Georgia in 2008. And we are grateful for your statements you delivered yesterday after the bilateral defense consultations, which I'm sure was yet another interesting round of discussions on the key priorities. So, please, Dr. Farkas, could you please provide us your assessment on where we stand now in terms of defense cooperation, and what are the key milestones we would like to and we plan to achieve over the short and medium-term period, and what are the key highlights of your visit so far?
Okay, well first I would like to say thank you very much, Misha, for hosting me here. Thank you to the Atlantic Council. This is a fantastic opportunity to speak about our relationship among friends. I've been very grateful. I've worked on Georgia now intensely, as you know, for 3 years, and so it's good I've had an opportunity at this juncture to meet with not only Ministry of Defense officials, but former officials as well, such as yourself. So I'm glad Atlantic Council was able to attract someone of your caliber to come and work here, and thank you for welcoming me. I have some prepared remarks, so if you don't mind, I will give a little bit of a summary of our defense relationship, and then hopefully we can have some Q&A. I know you will have some good questions for me. So again, thank you for welcoming us. Our relationship, the U.S. Georgia Defense relationship, is vital for us because, and I want to reiterate some basic things that everyone knows, but because of our shared values and our cooperation for over 2 decades making Georgia a more democratic and prosperous country. Our partnership in regional and international security efforts also are very important to the relationship, not least of which has been, as you mentioned, Misha, fighting shoulder to shoulder in Afghanistan. The United States recognizes, values, and supports Georgia's contributions to international security, its ongoing defense sector reforms, which I'll touch upon in a few minutes, and of course its goal of NATO membership. We share concerns about Russia's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and its occupation and its attempted illegal annexation of Crimea, as well as Russia's aggressive actions that threaten many of its neighbors, including Georgia, and of course I'm mindful of the continued occupation of Georgia's territory. Today I'd like to again provide some brief remarks about the history of our bilateral defense relationship and then give you an update. Again, I look forward to questions from you. As Misha mentioned, we have a long established relationship now. We started in 1992 with our security cooperation, and it has accelerated beginning in 2004, of course, with the Rose Revolution. And Georgia now is one of the most dependable partners of the United States. It's a very strong statement, and I think it's most evident in the context of Afghanistan and Georgia's significant contributions there in Afghanistan over the last decade together with the United States. As you mentioned, Georgia's soldiers have been deployed there since 2004. In March 2010, Georgia deployed a full infantry battalion and fought shoulder to shoulder with U.S. Marines in Helmand province, one of the most dangerous areas in Afghanistan, and did so without caveats, without any restrictions. By the fall of 2012, Georgia had dedicated an additional infantry battalion and had become the largest per capita troop contributor, and of course the largest non-NATO contributor to our efforts in Afghanistan. Now with, and at that time with over 1,500 troops in theater. Georgia continues its extraordinary support to Afghanistan. As many of you know, Georgia is the #2 troop contributor after the United States. Again, something that we very much value. And you have approximately 860 soldiers deployed there today. Georgia's fighting units have made a significant impact on the battlefield, but of course not without costs. Just as the United States forces have suffered, Georgia's forces have suffered, with 29 service members killed in action and 281 wounded in action. This is a sacrifice that Georgia and service members have paid, demonstrates again Georgia's dedication to regional security, to fighting counterterrorism together with the United States and the international community. The United States Marines and soldiers have trained with their Georgian counterparts for the mission in Afghanistan, again since 2004, at Kivtsanitsi, at your training area outside the capital here, which is one of the primary areas for the Georgian Armed Forces to train with the United States. At KTA, the forces are trained in infantry and counterinsurgency tactics, techniques, and procedures. The phases are designed, of course, to prepare your forces to deploy with us in Afghanistan. In 2012, as you mentioned, the U.S. and Georgian presidents decided to endorse a new enhanced defense cooperation program. This is very important. This provides the foundation for our efforts to boost Georgia's defense capabilities and to modernize and reform your defense, your ministry, and your armed forces. We have, of course, increased our efforts along those lines, and part of it is in training, and I'll talk about that in a second, but annually we have a lot of exercises that we conduct together with Georgia, either in the bilateral context or in the NATO context. Some of these, some of you may have heard of: Combined Resolve, Rapid Trident, Sea Breeze, and Agile Spirit, which of course Georgia has generously hosted here annually. In addition, Georgia has of course had a strong relationship with the state of Georgia in the United States, and that's through our Army State Partnership Program, and I wanted to mention that because it does offer also the opportunity for people-to-people engagement, in as much as we have the state of Georgia engaging with the government of Georgia and your armed forces. And they also have conducted exercises such as Shared Horizons, which helps improve emergency response preparedness. I want to now, if you will indulge me, Nisha, sort of switch to the security environment that we face today and then give you an update. On the security environment, of course, now we realize that this relationship with Georgia is more vital than ever. And we're looking at this in the international context, not just the regional context. Due to Russia's actions, we see that Russia is now challenging the vision that we have of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. And again, Russia attempting to annex and occupy part of Ukraine continues to occupy more than 20% of the Georgian territory. It's a clear challenge to international norms and values, and so we need to work together, the United States and our NATO allies, to call on Russia to reverse its recognition of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And of course now with these new agreements, we don't know if they're trying to make them independent or dependent, but nevertheless, we need to call on Russia to reverse their actions there, and of course to honor the ceasefire in Ukraine, which in reality they're violating on a regular basis. As of early April, as many of you know, Russian military forces continue to operate in, well, as of today, in eastern Ukraine. And despite their public pronouncements about withdrawing heavy weapons, they have not done so. In fact, there's training going on there, and I can go on about the details, but I won't. Suffice it to say that we remain concerned as ever, about Russia's actions in Ukraine. The United States government has a three-pronged policy. Number one, we are providing deterrence and reassurance to our NATO allies and partners. Number two, we are supporting Ukraine. And number three, we are raising the cost to Russia. There's no military resolution to the crisis ultimately. We will hope that there is a diplomatic solution. But in the meantime, the United States government and our Department of Defense is in the forefront here. We've committed over $200 million of assistance to the government of Ukraine to beef up their territorial security, to their border security, and to their armed forces. I can talk about what that security assistance is, but suffice it to say, it goes everywhere from basic needs to counter-mortar radar, to EOD, so explosive detection robots, perimeter security, patrol boats, medical supplies, etc. The U.S., I think, has been very actively also calling on allies and partners to help in this effort. So I would here like to also reiterate what I've said to Georgian officials, which is, please, you have a lot of know-how, you have a lot of experience, and you can contribute, you can help the Ukrainians with their efforts to reform their military and to provide for their security. And you can help us also encourage other partner countries to do the same. We've also contributed, the United States, nearly $1 billion to what we're calling the European Reassurance Initiative. What that is basically is a lot of exercises and efforts to beef up the ability of our NATO allies and partners to defend their territory, to show presence, again, to deter further Russian action. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're raising the cost to Russia. Many of you are familiar with the sanctions that we have imposed, that the European Union has imposed. The United States and European colleagues arm in arm in terms of imposing sanctions and showing the Russian government that that there will be costs that they have to pay. And again, we're pressing forward. We have not finished in terms of, until we have a resolution, we will continue to look at our policy and strengthen it. Let me just say a few words again, as I mentioned, updating you all with regard to our relationship, because yesterday, as you mentioned, we had our bilateral defense consultation. These were the 14th round of these bilateral defense consultations that we've held with the Georgian Ministry of Defense. They were very productive. We are on pace. The defense relationship is stronger than ever, and we're continuing to build on all the great work that the previous governments have put into place. So I think I can reassure the Georgian people, the Georgian academics, the Georgian cognoscenti, if you will, that everything is proceeding apace in the defense relationship. Again, we are very much grateful for the fact that Georgia is remaining with us in the Resolute Support mission in Afghanistan. The Georgian government has committed to stay the course, so we thank you for that. We are working also as part of our commitment to Georgia in return on the Wounded Warrior Program. The Georgian government, and Misha, you're very familiar with this, you know it's a mutual bilateral priority. The Georgian government has committed to establish its own program to provide long-term care for the wounded warriors and to assimilate them into society. And I very much commend the Georgian government for everything that they've done in terms of the holistic approach, but also the medical service that they're providing to wounded warriors. We also continue to work with Georgia to deepen and bolster your security, and part of the European Reassurance Initiative included, as you may have followed, because the President, when he announced it in Poland, I guess about a year ago, he specifically mentioned Georgia, and there's $20 million of additional assistance that we're providing to Georgia, and most of that funding will help boost Georgia's defense capabilities. And those will be in line with priorities that have been established by previous ministries of defense. This ministry has the same priorities for how to enhance Georgia's defense capabilities, and in line with those constant priorities, the United States is going to help Georgia. So again, despite change in leadership, we're moving ahead also on implementing the Wales Summit commitments. Georgia was very fortunate to receive an enhanced package from NATO, and what that means is, of course, it was a recognition of Georgia's really key partnership with NATO, and you were led into sort of a core group. We also committed to set up a training center here, and I can report here also that this training center, where we will conduct joint exercises, NATO exercises, that is on track. The funding has been identified, and we have discussed with the Ministry of Defense a plan for that. So we expect the initial operating capability by the end of 2015. Everything's on track, everything's on schedule. So that's very good news in terms of the NATO process for Georgia. And we have a lot of NATO officials who will be coming here very soon in the near future to help implement this. So I think what I will close with is that the United States remains steadfast in support of NATO, in support of Georgia's aspirations to accede to NATO, in support of Georgia's membership aspirations. We are working, of course, in this new security context. It makes it much more difficult. We must work more closely together. But the United States will stay active, engaged, more engaged than ever before, I would hasten to say, with Georgia to continue to support you in your objectives. So again, thank you for the opportunity for me to reiterate this in the most forceful way possible. And if I could just say a few other words, really, I know in these think tank surroundings, we oftentimes want to look and peel apart the problems and how can we do better. But I really want to commend this government, but also the Georgian people and the Georgian governments all the way across. I have been working on Georgia for 3 years and have really been very impressed with how much progress you have made in implementing our bilateral agenda and Georgia's international agenda. So I think this is a good moment to also say, we, the United States, very much respect and commend you for everything that you have done, all of your parties, since over the last several years. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, for very comprehensively covering all the key issues, which I'm sure our audience would like to hear, and we can be really proud of our achievements in bilateral defense cooperation, but there is also need to build on what has been achieved so far, and especially the main focus should be on the proper implementation of the Wales Summit decisions, and I'm sure the Europe Reassurance Initiative voiced by President Obama will help and will have to contribute to this. Since we have some time constraints, with your permission, I will directly go to the floor and ask for questions or comments. Question from there. Please identify yourself, Helen.
Can I speak just without mic?
No, we have mics over there.
Thank you very much. And first of all, can you hear me now? Yeah. Welcome to Georgia. You have mentioned the Europol Free and Peace, the conceptual framework that has drove the enlargement process of NATO and EU, that has brought peace and has eliminated the dividing lines in the region. Now with this new security environment where Russia is trying to create new dividing lines, including in my country, what is the vision of the role of NATO enlargement in this context? Especially, and I will be very open with you, we don't see there have been at least 2 summits where we have at least ambiguity regarding the enlargement. And also we hear some voices from NATO member states about the lack of commitment to NATO enlargement, like the President of France recently, and we don't see real U.S. leadership in this process. That has been also one of the key driving forces for the enlargement. So what's your perspective on the future of NATO enlargement in this region? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think NATO enlargement, first of all, the door is open, and it's not just rhetorical. If you look at what happened in Wales, at Wales, the NATO, all 28 allies, made a decision that Montenegro should get a vote. And so there is going to be a decision with regard to Montenegro. And I think with regard to Georgia, as I mentioned in my statement, you have made a lot of progress. You're continuing to make progress. So I don't see any, any change in terms of the status. There's onward progress, and all of the aspirants to, and I actually in my office, we are dealing with all of those aspirant countries, and to a greater or lesser extent, they're all continuing on the path towards integration with NATO, and we, the United States, are supporting that effort. So I don't share a generally pessimistic view. I do think the overall trend is positive.
More questions, comments? Yes, please.
Thank you, the Patriotic Peace Association of Georgia. Thank you for coming to Georgia. Thank Atlantic Council of Georgia for organizing this event. My question is regarding terrorism. If there are any kind of relationship or cooperation between USA and Georgia regarding the fighting against terrorists, and particularly if there are any strategy fighting against ISIS, Islamic State.
Thank you for the question. Clearly that is the challenge of terrorism, the threat posed by terrorism is a mutual threat and of course an international threat. We did discuss with the Ministry of Defense the need to do more, and we have a lot of programs in the Department of Defense to work together with the Ministry of Defense to counter terrorism. And so some of the work that we are doing with the Ministry of Defense will address that. But of course, it's not just a Ministry of Defense area of competency, but some of the other agencies will also need to play a role, and so I can't speak to that. But clearly, countering ISIS is very important. It's also an area where, frankly speaking, we would think that the Russian government would be interested in cooperating with the United States, with Georgia, and other countries. But unfortunately, we have yet to see any evidence of that. But clearly, the threat posed by terrorism, which is international but also has regional components, is one that we can address together, we will address together. We already have very good partnership with regard to increasing the capability of your forces to deal with terrorism, but we will continue to work on that.
Counterterrorism issue has been one of the key elements of our cooperation, and the operation and training which started back to 2001 specifically was tailored to deal with the challenge we had on the Pankisi Gorge, and since that we've been cooperating very effectively together, and we were part of the ISAF operation, as Evelyn mentioned, with the biggest troops ever. 1,600 troops were deployed in the operation, and currently we continue our efforts shoulder to shoulder with American and European allies, with more than 860 soldiers in ISAF under the Resolute Support Mission, and this cooperation will continue. And as I mentioned, actually, this cooperation brought a lot of expertise and experience to our militaries, and there is kind of a perception at NATO, among some NATO allies, that Georgian militaries are ready for NATO membership, and I would fully subscribe to this perception. And we still need to do some things, of course, in terms of political integration, but militaries are doing a great job. And speaking about it, could you please evaluate the level of preparedness of Georgian troops that you contributed a lot to the United States over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I'm not a military commander, but clearly when I speak to the military commanders, they speak very highly of Georgian forces' readiness, of their capabilities. There's a deep respect. We have one of our colleagues from the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps has deep respect for the Georgians that they have fought with, and there's a tie there that I believe will be enduring. But we assess the Georgians to be very capable and, again, very dependable partners. So politically and militarily, Georgia is a true partner.
Thank you. Thanks for yes.
Hello. My name is Kamran Mamedov. I'm a master degree student at Caucasus University. My question is about terrorism, about ICC. As you know, from Georgia, we have some citizens going to fight on the side of terrorists. They are mostly religious minorities and some ethnic minorities from Komukartli are also. My question is, I will try to make it shorter. From my point of view, this is the cause of Georgian nationalism. As Georgia knows that Georgian nationalism means Orthodox Christians, ethnic Georgians, and living in Georgia. In this condition, about 20 or 25% of Georgian population thinks that they are not part of Georgian nation. What would be your recommendation to Georgian government or majority to end this issue? Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question, and actually that issue has come up in our discussions with the government specifically. And what we talked to the Georgian government about was the fact that we do have some experience where there's been success in dealing with terrorism. So for example, in Colombia, where you also have a terrorist threat. And what we found was that you need an interagency approach. So it's not just a military or an intelligence or an internal security approach, but there need to be economic opportunities. As you mentioned, they need to feel part of Georgia socially, politically, and economically. And so for dealing with minorities who feel that they're not included, that they have insufficient options, it's very important for the government to come up with a holistic approach. And Colombia did that very effectively with their internal, what they called Plan Colombia. We had a U.S. response we also called Plan Colombia, which was providing support to them, not only military support, but also USAID assistance in development, so that the farmers and the people in those rural areas, and in that case it was primarily rural areas, could develop some alternative economic means for providing for their families. So I do think that there are smart ways to address terrorism that include addressing what's happening at the community level. And I think the Georgian government is not alone. There are many other governments that need to take on this problem and do it in a holistic way.
Yes.
Hello, I'm from Georgia. My question about boosting of our defense. I think how United States will boost our defense. It's only we only train our soldiers on, or give us some modern weapons.
Well, we have a very extensive program to help your government and help its military, but it's a partnership, so it's not the U.S. just giving assistance. It's a true partnership whereby the Georgian government, the Georgian Ministry of Defense is also very actively engaged, establishing priorities, and then we come in to support those priorities. One component is training, certainly the training that's ongoing still to help the troops who are deploying to Afghanistan, but there's all kinds of other training that will help bolster territorial defense. That, of course, is part of the deterrence now that Georgia needs to exercise. There's also another component, which is, of course, equipment, providing equipment according to priorities established by the Georgian government. So we are moving ahead with modernizing, professionalizing the Georgian government in keeping with the need to help deter Russia and deal with the threats that Georgia faces today.
Actually, one of the key highlights of the visit of Secretary of Defense to Georgia, at that time Secretary Hagel last year, was that the readiness, the clear message from the Secretary about the readiness of the United States to start cooperation with Georgia on defensive arms and even military helicopters were mentioned during the joint press point with the Georgia Defense Minister. This is a very key issue, and I'm sure with our joint efforts we'll be able to progress and we'll be able to boost Georgia's defense capabilities. Trainings, I absolutely agree, are key, but also without having modern defensive capabilities, it's really hard to cope with the current challenge that Georgia faces, and also it will create an deterrence effect, any ill wishers, together with Europe's Wishes Initiative plus the U.S Summit decision and enhanced package for Georgia, but through the support of the United States and the European allies. I want to talk about one of the key elements and deliverables of the U.S Summit, the Readiness Action Plan, which the alliance and the United States pays a lot of attention and spares a lot of efforts. And just 2 days ago in Izmir, there was a meeting of North Atlantic Council that traveled there, and the main focus they made was the NATO Readiness Action Plan. So, from your perspective, how do you see how Georgia can contribute to the effectiveness of the NATO Readiness Action Plan? proud that we are part of the NATO response force
Yeah,
already.
that's good. That's what I was going to say.
But are there any other areas where we can be true and effective partners in this?
I mean, I think obviously everything that you do to bolster your security is beneficial because we are looking at deterring Russia, and so across the board we need to unite together. So as I mentioned before, helping Ukraine would also be helpful. In terms of the more specific nitty-gritty of the Readiness Action Plan, I think your contribution to the NRF is very significant. And I mentioned yesterday we are going to have an exercise together with the Georgian troops to prepare the NRF, our U.S. and Georgian NRF component. So we'll have about 300 Americans coming here shortly in a couple of weeks to do this exercise, Noble Partner. That's significant. We've never had an exercise like that before in Georgia. So we are very grateful for the fact that Georgia stepped up and said we would like to contribute in this fashion. So I think we're quite happy and pleased with Georgia's contribution there.
Thank you. We have a question, Nick, and you.
Thank you. Nick, Public. My question is for following. You know, during previous administration, Russian state-funded TV channels were basically off there. Today they are reintroduced here in Georgia, and Georgian public is basically bombarded with anti-Western, Atlanticist, philosophy, and they portray West as, in terribly unfavorable fashion. And has it been any initiative coming from either your government or my government here to join forces to somehow resist that Russian-based propaganda, which is, as I said, aimed at derailing Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations? Because in democracies, as well known, public opinion matters, and this public opinion is being systematically eroded. So, is there anything that you are going to do about it together with Georgian partners?
Thank you for the question. It's not directly in my area of competency, but I will say we definitely recognize that there's a problem with regard to Russian propaganda and the use of Russian media to spread this propaganda worldwide, and the United States, of course, is not immune either. I think the answer is, of course, always to put out the truth, but many of you know it takes time in a democracy to put out the truth because you try to verify and establish what the truth is before you put it out. With propaganda, you could just say whatever you want. So we do face a challenge. It's a weakness for democracies, but over time, I do believe that truth will prevail. That's not to say that we shouldn't respond in the media and we shouldn't respond by putting out more truth more quickly. I know that my government is seized with this problem and that the State Department and other elements of our government are working on how we can better support our partners. Part of it is putting out Russian language content, which is not something that the U.S. government would necessarily take the lead on. The Baltic countries, I know that they have united, and they are, maybe with Poland even, and they are looking at what they can do. So I think that would be an area, though, for the EU, and I would ask the EU to take that on, together with additional law enforcement measures to strengthen the states that are potentially vulnerable to little green men and this kind of social propaganda.
Last IRI polls demonstrated that the Georgia's NATO membership enjoys more than 78% from the public support, but we should be cognizant that this support cannot be taken as a granted, because I absolutely subscribe to what Nicholas said, that there is a massive anti-Western, anti-NATO propaganda in Georgia, funded by, of course, different sources and by Russian Federation. And clearly we were really encouraged to see that this is the media fighting with the counter-Western, anti-Western propaganda was a part of President Obama's U.S. initiative, and it was also part of the provision of the bill which was adopted by the Senate in support of the Ukraine. And we really hope that these efforts will produce real benefits on the ground in Georgia and in the countries who are vulnerable in this regard. We have a question from Georgia.
Thank you. Georgia Chase, the Atlantic Council of Georgia. Thank you for your interesting comments and presentation. In Georgia, of course, it's understandable. The first number one security issue is the occupation and the annexation of the Georgian territory. But if it comes to the second one, on everybody's mind is the situation is in the security-wide situation in Ukraine. And as we have seen recently, and if you look back, a year and a couple of years, Russia is not fulfilling and observing the agreements and the ceasefires it's subscribing to. And what we see now is again that their increased aggressiveness around Mariupol, and it seems that there is no clear-cut red lines. The clear-cut signal sent on the red lines to the Russian side that if it breaches, then some more robust action will come. Whether it's the increased, more robust sanctions or the other efforts, being it the military assistance or otherwise. So, don't you think that? And if you think so, don't you think that there is a necessity to make a more clear, clear-cut red lines for the other side, for the Russian side, in order to increase the deterrence effect and in order to stop the violation of the ceasefire agreements? And if you think so, what that kind of red lines would be? Would it be Mariupol? Would it be something else? And how do you think that this deterrence effect could be strengthened in order for Russia to stop breaching its agreement and becoming ever more aggressive? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We remain concerned that we have not yet deterred, it's a process, the Russians from their ongoing activity there. I think establishing red lines can go both ways, because sometimes sometimes ambiguity is a positive thing. So I'm not sure whether I would subscribe to the notion that you must establish a red line. What we have said consistently across the board, the United States government as well as our European allies, is we will raise the costs. So if you guys keep this up, you in the Kremlin making the decisions to do this, if you keep this up, then the cost will continue to raise. And our president has been very clear that that includes sanctions. No, nothing is off the table as far as, we will continue to look at what military assistance we will give Ukraine. So the Russian government has to be thinking, has to have big question marks in its head about if they make this move, what is next. Mariupol is a city of 500,000 people. We don't take that lightly, but even if you go around Mariupol and you take a small village, we don't take that lightly either. So I think we remain concerned, and we would like Russia to not have to necessarily know clearly what we will do, because they should just know that there's a response coming. And I would really also reiterate that our European colleagues are with us, and we rely, of course, on Georgia as well to continue the pressure, to continue to keep the pressure on the Kremlin. There's economic pressure, we're together with the Europeans on that, I mentioned before, but there's also diplomatic pressure. There's keeping it in the media and helping counter the messages that the Russian people are hearing. One of the things is that this is a secret war inside of Russia. The Russian people are being told that there are no Russian troops in eastern Ukraine, that there's no war, it's an undeclared war. I think that truth needs to be communicated to the Russian people, and probably you guys are in a better place to do that than we are because of your contacts in your history with the Russian people. So I don't foresee this proceeding as it has to date. I mean, at some point this has to end, and the Kremlin will not succeed.
Do you think Russians are getting your messages?
Who? Which Russians?
Well, the leadership, I mean, executives, who are making the decision makers. I mean,
I don't know, Misha. I can't speculate on what they're hearing, what they're getting. We deliver our messages to them. Secretary Kerry meets regularly with Minister Lavrov. We have very clear messages about Ukraine and about Russia's actions here in Europe. So whether they're getting it, meaning comprehending it and understanding what the full consequences are, I can't say. But we deliver them consistently.
Definitely. We follow that, and we are very appreciative that you are extremely active in terms of delivering this message to the Russian leadership. But whether they get or not, it should reflect on the developments on the ground. And unfortunately, so far, the developments there are not promising. And I hope the price for them, political price and economic price, will increase. And because we clearly see the link between developments in 2008, Russian invasion of Georgia and occupation, and developments in Ukraine. Had Russia paid sufficient price for that, or invading Georgia, I'm pretty confident we wouldn't have faced developments in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this is a reality, and we have to deal with that.
And if I could, this is an international security issue. So I have a lot of Asian colleagues who come in to ask me, what is Russia doing? I mean, this violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, of Georgia's sovereignty, it has awakened a lot of concern, not just in Europe. So I think it's important to note, and the MH17, the shoot down, the investigation is ongoing. There will be results at some point, I believe, in the coming months. So it's, and that has the interest of course, a lot of nations who unfortunately suffered when 200 plus people went to their deaths at the hands of, well, we'll find out, right?
We have time for one last question. Yes.
What could have the Atlantic Council of Georgia? Thank you very much for a very comprehensive overview of the regional security context. So, my question is about the regional security arrangements. As we all remember, in different phases of our Euro-Atlantic aspirations, Georgia and Ukraine been either coupled and then decoupled because of the different internal developments. But right now, the Ukraine would be developments in Ukraine would be decisive for the future European security. So how you would perceive the role of the Black Sea security for the Euro-Atlantic security arrangement? Black Sea security has been several times mentioned in the NATO communique, NATO summit communique, so that was in Chicago and also in the World Summit communique. So what should be the cooperation mechanism on the Black Sea? What roles Georgia and Ukraine with other NATO member Black Sea littoral countries should play, and how that would contribute to the overall Euro-Atlantic security?
I think, thank you for the question. I think Black Sea security is very important, and part of the European Reassurance Initiative, part of our deterrence of Russia, is to show that the Black Sea does not belong to anybody. There's many countries who have an interest, and we, of course, the United States, preserve freedom of economic movement, and our military passes through regularly. And I think we have an upcoming port visit here, maybe not be public, but anyway. We regularly come and visit Georgia as well, let me just say that. And so we take very seriously Black Sea security and the fact that there should be no one country that exercises sovereignty over the Black Sea. Clearly working with Ukraine and Georgia as part of that. And so in that respect, Georgia and Ukraine, all the countries around the Black Sea are coupled together in this effort. And I think we need to think more seriously about, in light of what Russia has done, in light of the annexation of Crimea, the attempted annexation of Crimea, in light of the forces that Russia has placed in Crimea, what does that mean for Black Sea security? And I think you're right, we need to continue the dialogue and to continue to work on how we react, how we address that, because there are clear now potential new threats, and some of the rhetoric that's come out of the Kremlin has been very alarming with regard to nuclear capabilities, etc. So again, we need to take now a new look at Russia and the threat that Russia poses in light of their military actions, most recently in Ukraine.
Well, I think it was a very interesting discussion today about the U.S. Georgia Defense Cooperation, about the regional security, and if not time constraints, we would continue, of course, for a little bit longer time, but this is the reality. I know that today you will have, together with the MOD officials and the Minister of Foreign Affairs officials, yet another round of security and defense working group under the partnership charter, and I wish you and our Georgian colleagues all the success and specific deliverables of this working group meetings with the aim of boosting Georgia's defense capability and further developing our cooperation. And with that, please help me to thank Dr. Farkas for her performance.